Welcome to Dark Whispers, where every story hides a secret and every secret hides a nightmare. Turn down the light and put on your headphones and listen closely, because the whispers were meant for you. Now, let's get started. The hospital sat on the edge of the city, its tallest tower looming above the streetlights like a sentinel watching over the sleepless. By day, it was bustling with the familiar noises of gurneys squeaking, intercom calls, and doctors rushing between wards. But by night, when visiting hours ended and most of the staff went home, it felt like a different place entirely. Empty corridors stretched out like veins, humming faintly with the sound of ancient fluorescent bulbs. Mark was a new night shift orderly. The year was 1999, and he had just turned 24. For months, he'd been struggling to hold down work, hopping between jobs that never stuck. When the hospital called him back after his interview, offering him a full-time graveyard shift position, he didn't hesitate. He told himself hospitals weren't so bad. People got sick, people got better, and people died. It was part of life. On his first night, the head nurse gave him the standard tour: the emergency ward, the ICU, the psychiatric wing, and the surgical floors. Everything looked sterile, clean, and manageable. But as they walked back, she stopped at the end of a corridor he hadn't noticed before. It stretched deeper into the building, unlit, its heavy metal doors chained together with a rusty lock. "That wing's been closed for years," the nurse said. "Administration says it's unsafe." Mark nodded, but something about the chained doors stayed with him. It wasn't just that they looked old, it was the way the hallway seemed darker than the rest of the hospital, as if the shadows inside had weight. The first week passed uneventfully. Mark made rounds, wheeled patients to radiology, restocked supplies, and kept an eye out for trouble. The nights were long, but manageable. Then, on a quiet Wednesday, he started hearing it. It was just past 3 a.m. when he stopped at the end of a corridor, pushing a mop bucket. The building was silent except for the buzz of lights. Then, faintly, from behind those chained doors, came the sound of a knock. 3 steady taps, like someone gently rapping their knuckles on wood. Mark froze. He thought it might be his imagination, but the sound came again, slower this time, like whoever was knocking had all the time in the world. He told himself it was pipes, or maybe just the old wing settling. But the hair on the back of his neck bristled. He left the mop where it was and finished his shift without looking back. The knocking continued over the following nights. Sometimes soft, sometimes insistent, always from behind those chained doors. Mark mentioned it once to the security guard, an older man named Harris, who'd been working at the hospital for decades. Harris just shook his head. "Don't go near that wing. It ain't nothing good down there. Some places hold on to things, you understand." Mark laughed it off, but Harris's expression never softened. By the second week, Mark couldn't resist anymore. On a rainy Friday night, the hospital was quieter than usual. He grabbed a flashlight from the supply closet and walked to the locked doors. The chains looked ancient, the lock rusted almost to dust. The hallway beyond was pitch black, stretching into what looked like endless shadow. He pressed his ear against the cold metal. Silence. Then faintly came the sound of breathing. Not his own, not close, but far down the corridor, like someone exhaling after holding their breath for too long. Mark stumbled back, flashlight trembling in his hand. He told himself he was imagining things, that fatigue was getting to him. But as he turned to leave, something whispered his name. Not loudly, not menacingly. Just a soft, almost curious voice, echoing faintly from the darkness. That night he didn't sleep. The next day, he asked around casually about the closed wing. Most staff brushed him off, either claiming they didn't know or insisting it was condemned after a fire years ago. But one of the older nurses leaned closer and lowered her voice. They shut it down after the psychiatric expansion. Back in the 70s, they kept the violent patients there. It wasn't safe. Too many incidents. People disappeared. Staff quit without explanation. After the fire, they sealed it off for good. Mark tried to laugh, but the unease in her eyes stopped him. By the third week, the hospital began to change for him. Shadows seemed longer, sounds sharper. He'd catch glimpses of figures in the corner of his eye, patients in gowns wandering too far from their wards, but when he turned, the hall was empty. He heard voices, whispers floating through vents, murmuring words he couldn't understand. Once, while pushing a wheelchair past the ICU, he felt cold fingers brush the back of his neck, though no one was there. Still, he kept working. He needed the money. One night, Harris the guard found him in the break room, staring at his untouched coffee. "You look pale, son," Harris said. "Ain't you been hearing them?" Mark hesitated, then nodded. Harris sighed. "I've worked this place 30 years. That wing they called it Ward C wasn't just for patients. They ran experiments there, shock therapy, isolation, drugs that'd never be legal now. Some folks say the doctors went too far. The fire didn't kill them, it just trapped them here. That's why I don't go near it." Mark tried to take his advice, but the knocking grew worse. Now it came every night, sometimes so loud it echoed down the hall. And always, after the knocks, came the whisper. Mark, on the last night of his third week, he couldn't take it anymore. At 2:47 a.m., clutching his flashlight, he walked to the chained doors. His heart pounded as he touched the lock. To his surprise, it crumbled in his hands, rust flaking away like paper. The chains fell with a metallic clang that echoed down the hall. The doors creaked open. The stench hit him, first mold, rot, and something metallic beneath it, like old blood. The beam of his flashlight cut through the dark, illuminating cracked tiles and peeling paint. The walls were smeared with stains that looked too dark to be rust. Beds with broken restraints sat in alcoves, their leather straps stiff with age. The silence was thick, oppressive, as though the air itself didn't want him there. He stepped inside. The corridor stretched on endlessly, every door he passed slightly ajar. As he pushed one open, his light fell on a hospital room frozen in time. Papers lay scattered across the floor, medical charts yellowed with age. The bed still had sheets on it, though they were stiff and stained. In the corner, an old wheelchair faced the wall, its seat torn. Mark's breath caught when he realized the faint sound of breathing was back, closer now. He swung the flashlight wildly, but the hole was empty. He pressed forward, his shoes crunching on glass and debris. The deeper he went, the colder the air became, until his breath fogged before him. The whispers returned, not one voice, but dozens, overlapping in a dissonant chorus. Some laughed softly, others cried, some whispered words he couldn't understand. But beneath them all was a steady chant, "Stay with us." Mark's flashlight flickered. In the split-second darkness, he saw them, figures lining the hall, patients in hospital gowns, their eyes black hollows, their mouths twisted open in silent screams. When the light steadied, the hall was empty again. He turned to leave, but the doors behind him had vanished. The hallway stretched endlessly in both directions, twisting and bending like a maze. Panic surged in his chest as he stumbled forward, unsure where he was going. From one of the rooms came a sound, a rhythmic squeak, like wheels turning. He edged closer, pushing the door open. Inside, the wheelchair from earlier was moving, rolling slowly toward him on its own. He backed away, heart hammering, when suddenly it stopped. And the whisper came again, louder this time, right beside his ear. He spun, but no one was there. The lights above him flickered violently, and when they steadied, the hallway was gone. He stood in a wide ward lined with beds. Every bed was occupied. Figures lay under sheets, their faces hidden, their chests rising and falling in unison. The air was thick with the sound of synchronized breathing. Mark backed toward the exit, but the patients began to sit up, one by one. Their heads turned toward him in perfect unison, their hollow eyes fixing on his. The sheets slipped from their faces, revealing burned skin, melted features, gaping mouths that opened wider and wider until their jaws cracked. The chant filled the room again, deafening now. Stay with us, stay with us." Mark screamed and ran, sprinting down the endless corridor, the sound of footsteps chasing him, though he never saw anyone behind him. The air grew heavier, the walls closer, until it felt like the building itself was swallowing him. His flashlight died, plunging him into darkness. And then silence. When Harris made his rounds at dawn, he found the chains to Ward C broken, the doors ajar. Inside, there was nothing but dust and silence. No sign of Mark. All they ever found was his flashlight, lying on the cracked tiles, still warm to the touch. The knocking never stopped. Harris didn't report what he'd found that morning. After 3 decades on the job, he knew the hospital administration would dismiss it, call it vandalism, maybe even blame him for negligence. And besides, how could he explain what he saw? The lock was ancient, but he swore he had checked it every night. Now it was gone. Still, something gnawed at him. He'd seen too many young workers vanish in this place. They came, lasted a few weeks, and then either quit suddenly or simply disappeared. Harris had always told himself they just couldn't handle the stress. But standing there staring into the silent dark of Ward C, he wasn't so sure anymore. That night, Harris carried his revolver. He wasn't supposed to, but he trusted his gut more than hospital policy. When the clock struck 3 a.m., he heard it again, the knocking. Same rhythm, same deliberate beat. It echoed through the chained doors, though the chains were gone now. Harris gritted his teeth and pulled the doors wider. The stench wafted out immediately, sour and metallic. He clicked on his flashlight and stepped inside. "Well, Mark," he called. "If you're in here." No reply. Just the faint shuffle of movement down the hall. The deeper he went, the more familiar it felt. The peeling paint, the rusted bed frames, the lingering smell of rot. He'd been here once before, decades ago, when the wing was still active. Back then, Ward C had been a nightmare even without the fire. Patients screaming through the night, doctors pushing limits nobody should have. He remembered one patient in particular, a woman named Ellen Reeves. She had been admitted for severe paranoia. Harris had seen her in the common room, whispering to herself, scratching her arms raw. But it wasn't until later that he heard what she whispered. "Yeah, they are in the walls. They're always watching when the fire comes." The fire came 2 weeks later. Ellen had burned with the rest. Or so he thought. As Harris turned a corner, his flashlight beam caught movement. A figure standing at the end of the corridor, pale and thin, wearing a hospital gown. Harris whispered. The figure took a step closer. The light revealed burned skin, hairless scalp, lips charred and cracked. It wasn't Mark. It was Ellen. Her hollow eyes locked on him, and her mouth moved soundlessly. Then, in a voice not her own, came the whisper, "Harris." His stomach dropped. He raised the revolver, but the gun felt like paper in his hand. Around him, more figures emerged from the rooms, patients with twisted limbs, nurses with melted faces, doctors with hands blackened by flame. They moved in silence, forming a circle around him. The whispers began, overlapping, hundreds of voices speaking in unison. Harris fired into the dark, the gunshot echoing like thunder. The figures didn't flinch. The bullet passed through Ellen, embedding itself in the wall behind her. The whispers grew louder. The walls themselves seemed to pulse, oozing black mold that crept toward him. Harris turned and ran, heart pounding, but every corridor twisted back on itself. The wing was alive, reshaping itself. Doors slammed shut. Lights flickered and burst. He stumbled into a wide ward, the same one Mark had seen weeks before. Beds lined the walls, all occupied. The patients sat up in unison, their hollow eyes fixing on him. And then Harris understood. This wasn't just a place of death. It was a prison. The hospital hadn't closed Ward C because of the fire. They had sealed it to keep what was inside from getting out. The figures closed in, their mouths opening in silent screams. Harris raised the revolver one last time, pressed it to his temple, and pulled the trigger. The gun clicked. Empty. The whispers surged around him. The last thing he saw before the darkness consumed him was Ellen's burned face bending close, her cracked lips whispering the words he would never escape. The hospital didn't advertise what had happened. To the daytime staff, Harris was just another tired guard who had quit in the middle of the night, leaving his post like dozens before him. but for the night workers, the nurses, janitors, and orderlies who actually felt the dread that seeped through the walls it was impossible to ignore. They whispered about it in break rooms, spoke about him in hushed tones. Harris had been solid, reliable, the kind of man who didn't scare easily. For him to vanish meant only one thing: Ward C had taken him too. Administration, of course, locked the doors again. A heavy new padlock replaced the rusted one, chains wound tighter than before. Warning signs were posted: condemned wing, entry strictly prohibited. But the signs did nothing to stop the sound. At 3 in the morning, like clockwork, the knocking returned. Some nights it was soft, almost playful, as though whoever was inside was teasing. Other nights it was violent, pounding with such force that dust shook loose from the ceiling. And sometimes the voices carried with it. Not one, not 2 dozens, murmuring in unison. The staff learned to ignore it, or at least pretend to. But not everyone could. That's where Claire Matthews came in. Claire was 29, a freelance journalist with a reputation for chasing strange stories. Her articles rarely made front-page news, but she had carved out a niche writing about local mysteries, haunted houses, abandoned asylums. She wasn't a believer, at least, that's what she told herself. To her, it was all atmosphere and psychology, people projecting fear onto old places. But she also knew that fear sold. She first heard about the hospital through a nurse she interviewed for a different story. The woman mentioned, almost offhand, that the hospital had a sealed-off wing nobody would talk about. That was enough for Claire. 2 weeks later, she showed up at the hospital lobby with her press badge and a notebook, claiming she was writing about hospital history. The daytime administrator gave her the usual tour: modern wards, surgical suites, gleaming equipment. Everything sterile, clean, boring. But when Claire asked about the closed-off section, the administrator's smile faltered. That wing is condemned. A fire damage, structurally unsafe, Claire pressed. Absolutely not, the administrator replied. It's sealed for a reason. But Claire wasn't discouraged. She had seen that flicker in his eyes: fear. Something more than liability issues was keeping those doors locked. That night, she returned with her camera and a recorder hidden in her bag. She waited in her car until the shift changed, then slipped inside through a side entrance. Hospitals were difficult to navigate, and she had a good memory from her earlier tour. Within 20 minutes, she was standing at the chained doors of Ward C, her flashlight beam caught the warning signs, the heavy lock, the fresh chains. For a moment, she considered turning back. Something about the hallway beyond seemed darker than it should, like the shadows were thicker than the light could cut. But then she heard it: the knock. 3 slow, deliberate taps. Her pulse quickened. She switched on her recorder, holding it close to the door. This is Claire Matthews. It's just past 3 in the morning. I'm at the doors to the condemned ward. Another knock. Louder this time. She flinched, but pressed closer. Hello. Silence. Then, faintly, came the sound of breathing. Slow, ragged, right on the other side of the door. Her mouth went dry. She told herself it was air moving through vents, or maybe some staff pulling a prank. But then a voice whispered through the gap. She stumbled back, dropping her recorder. Her flashlight flickered, and for a split second she saw movement through the crack in the door, a pale hand pressing against the other side. The skin blistered and blackened like it had been burned. Claire grabbed her recorder and bolted. She didn't stop running until she was in her car, shaking so hard she could barely fit the keys into the ignition. That should have been enough to scare her off. But when she played the recording back the next morning, her blood ran cold. The knocks were there, clear as day. The breathing was there too. But the whisper, the voice that had spoken her name, it hadn't been alone. Layered beneath it were dozens of other voices, overlapping in a chorus, too distorted to make out. And the last thing on the tape, just before she dropped the recorder, was something she hadn't noticed in the moment. A laugh, low, guttural, and inhuman. Claire knew she had a story. But more than that, she knew she had to go back. 2 nights later, she returned with better gear. A stronger flashlight, spare batteries, a tripod for her camera, and a crowbar to test the chains. She also brought someone with her, Alex Carter, a local urban explorer she sometimes hired for dangerous assignments. Alex was 22, reckless and fearless in a way that made him both useful and dangerous. "Is this the place?" he asked. Claire nodded. This is it. I need footage inside, just a few minutes." Alex grinned, hefting the crowbar. The chains didn't last 30 seconds. With a metallic screech, the lock snapped, and the doors groaned open. The stench hit them instantly: rot, mold, and something else beneath it, something metallic and sharp. Claire gagged, covering her mouth with her sleeve. Alex just smirked. "It smells like money." They stepped inside. The air was thick, heavy, as though the wing hadn't breathed in decades. Claire set up her camera on the tripod, its red light blinking as it recorded. Her flashlight beam cut across cracked tiles, broken gurneys, and stains that looked far too dark to be rust. This is Claire Matthews. We're inside Ward C. The hospital claims this wing was condemned after a fire. She trailed off, her light landing on something at the far end of the hall. A wheelchair. Old, rusted, facing the wall. Alex chuckled. Classic. They pressed deeper, opening doors into rooms frozen in time. Beds with restraints, medical charts yellowed with age, jars of unknown substances clouded with mold. Claire filmed everything, her unease growing with every step. Then came the sound. Not enough this time. A squeak. Rhythmic, steady. Like wheels turning. Claire froze, her light swinging wildly. Alex's grin faltered. The squeaking grew louder, echoing through the hall. Slowly, the wheelchair at the far end began to move. Its wheels squealed against the tile, rolling toward them on its own. Claire's breath caught in her throat. The chair stopped halfway down the hall. For a moment, silence pressed in around them. Then, from every room, doors slammed shut one after another, the sound like gunshots in the still air. Claire screamed. Alex grabbed her arm. We're leaving." They ran, but the hallway stretched impossibly longer, twisting in ways that didn't make sense. No matter how far they went, the exit never came into view. The whispers began again, dozens of voices overlapping, chanting words they couldn't understand. Claire's flashlight flickered, and in that momentary darkness, she saw them. Figures lining the hall, patients in burned gowns, nurses with hollow eyes, doctors with blackened hands. Their mouths moved in perfect unison with the whispers. Claire and Alex sprinted blindly, bursting into a wide ward lined with beds. Every bed was occupied. Figures lay under sheets, their chests rising and falling in synchronized rhythm. Alex stopped cold. "Are they?" The sheets began to slip. One by one, the patients sat up, turning their hollow eyes toward the intruders. Their mouths opened, stretching wider and wider until their jaws cracked. The chant roared through the room. Stay with us, stay with us." Alex pulled Claire, dragging her toward the far door. They stumbled through, slamming it behind them. The hall on the other side was unfamiliar, bending at impossible angles. Claire's camera clattered to the floor, its red light still blinking. Somewhere in the dark, a voice whispered her name again. Her knees buckled. Alex pulled her up, but as he did, she saw his face drain of color. What? He pointed. At the end of the hall stood Harris, or what was left of him. His uniform was burned, his eyes hollow, his mouth twisted into a permanent scream. He raised one hand and pointed at them. The whispering grew deafening. Alex dragged Claire, both of them running blindly through the twisting maze. Corridors bent and folded, doors led back into the same rooms they had left. Time itself seemed to warp. They couldn't escape. And then Claire realized the truth. The wing wasn't part of the hospital anymore. It wasn't just condemned, it was somewhere else entirely. A place that fed on the living, trapping them, pulling them into its endless loop. She stumbled, falling hard against the wall. Her recorder slipped from her pocket, landing on the tiles. Alex turned to pull her up, but hands erupted from the walls, burned, skeletal hands that grabbed him, dragging him screaming into the darkness. "For Claire," he shouted. She screamed, clawing at the tiles, but the hands didn't come for her. Instead, the hallway in front of her stretched open, revealing the chained doors. The exit. She staggered forward, heart pounding. The doors were open, the chains hanging loose. She stumbled through, collapsing into the lit corridor of the hospital. It was dawn. Nurses stared at her in shock as she collapsed on the floor, trembling, covered in dust and blood. Security rushed to her side, demanding answers, but she couldn't speak. All she could do was clutch her recorder to her chest, whispering the words over and over, "They are still there, they are still there." The footage from her camera was later recovered. Most of it was unusable, static, distortion, darkness. But one segment remained clear. The wide ward, the beds, the patients sitting up in unison, and their chant, echoing loud and clear, "Stay with us." Claire never published the story. She vanished 2 weeks later, last seen outside her apartment carrying her recorder. The hospital locked Ward C again, chaining the doors tighter than before. But every night at 3 a.m., the knocking returned. And now, if you listen closely, beneath the chorus of voices, you can hear something new. A woman's voice, whispering through the walls.